The day started like any other sunny Saturday by the lake, but within an hour it turned into one of the most shocking confrontations I've ever had with the HOA. I had invited a few close friends over to my property for a simple weekend gathering. We had packed coolers of food, set up chairs near the water, and even brought out a couple of kayaks. Everyone was laughing, enjoying the calm ripples on the lake, and for once I felt proud that the land I worked so hard for was being used exactly as I had dreamed. But then came Karen. Every neighborhood has one, and ours was no exception. She marched down from her perfect little house with a clipboard tucked under her arm and that angry squint in her eyes, the kind that makes you feel guilty even if you've done nothing wrong. She didn't bother saying hello. Instead, she raised her voice right over the sound of my friends chatting and shouted, "You can't have guests out here. This lake is for HOA residents only. Pack it up and leave now." At first, my friends froze, unsure if we were really breaking some rule. A few of them started folding their chairs nervously, not wanting to stir up trouble. But I knew the truth, and the truth was that Karen had no power here. She thought this lake belonged to the HOA, but what she didn't realize was that every inch of this land shall line water rights, and all belonged to me. I bought it long before her cookie-cutter subdivision was even built, so I stood up, looked her dead in the eye, and said calmly, "Karen, you're standing on my private land. You don't get to tell me or my guests what to do." The morning started with the kind of golden sunlight that makes you want to linger outside, soaking in the warmth before the day really begins. The lake shimmered as if someone had sprinkled handfuls of silver coins across its surface, and the tall pines that bordered the property swayed gently in the breeze. I stood on the back porch with a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, looking out at it all, and reminded myself of just how lucky I was. That lake wasn't just water to MIT, it was years of hard work, sacrifice, and saving. When I signed the deed, I promised myself that no one would ever make me feel like I didn't belong here. I was planning a gathering that Saturday. Nothing outrageous, just a handful of friends I hadn't seen in a while. Most of them lived in the city, far away from this pocket of peace. They were used to the grind of traffic, deadlines, and neighbors stacked like books on a shelf. Out here, though, things felt different, slower, calmer. That's why I had invited them. I wanted them to taste the freedom that this land and this lake gave me every single day. By 10 o'clock, the first car pulled up the long gravel driveway. Tires crackled over the stones, and I waved as my buddy Rick hopped out, holding a bag of ice over his shoulder and grinning. "Man, you weren't kidding about the view," he said, shading his eyes toward the water. Behind him, his wife, Sarah, stepped out with a cooler in one hand and a bundle of folding chairs in the other. Soon more cars followed, bringing laughter, food, kayaks strapped to roof racks, and the kind of energy that turns an ordinary morning into something memorable. We set up by the shoreline. Blankets were spread on the grass, coolers lined up like soldiers, and someone even brought a Bluetooth speaker, though we kept the music low so it blended with the chirping of the birds. For a while, everything was perfect. My friends dipped their feet in the water. Kids skipped rocks across the surface, and I felt a quiet swell of pride in knowing I had created this little refuge. It wasn't long before the kayaks were in the water. Rick and his son pushed off first, paddling into the wide-open middle of the lake, their shouts carrying back as they raced each other. Sarah and a few others followed, giggling as they wobbled, still figuring out how to keep steady. From my spot on the shore, I watched smiling, because this joy, this simplicity was exactly what I wanted when I opened my land to guests. Then came the sound I dreaded, sharp, heavy footsteps crunching across the grass from the subdivision side. Even before I saw her, I knew who it was. Every neighborhood has one, and ours was Karen. She was the kind of woman who carried herself like the world owed her something. Her hair was sprayed stiff, her lips pressed into a permanent scowl, and of course, she had her trusty clipboard tucked under one arm as though she were a judge presiding over her court. She didn't approach quietly. No, she marched straight toward the waterline, her voice cutting through the laughter. Excuse me, she barked, waving her free hand as though we were a group of unruly children. The chatter died down and my friends turned confused. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Already sensing trouble, Karen stopped a few feet from me and jabbed her finger toward the lake. "This is a private HOA lake," she declared, her voice shrill and commanding. "Only residents we're allowed to use it, and certainly not their outside guests. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is against the rules." For a moment, there was silence. Rick's kayak rocked gently in the distance as he paused his paddling to watch. My friends looked from me to Karen, uncertain, like they weren't sure if we were trespassing after all. One of them even began folding up her chair nervously, mumbling that she didn't want to cause trouble. I felt the anger rise inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the first time Karen had tried to throw her weight around, though usually it was something small: complaints about my gravel driveway, passive-aggressive notes about my lawn not looking uniform enough compared to the pressure standards. But this was different. She wasn't just coming after me. She was humiliating my friends, trying to ruin a day I had carefully planned. "Karen," I said evenly, meeting her stare, "you're mistaken. This isn't HOA property. This lake and the land around it belongs to me." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Oh, please, don't try to pull that. Everyone knows the HOA maintains this lake. You can't just invite whoever you want to use it. I'll have security down here in 5 minutes if you don't clear out." Behind me, my friends exchanged worried glances. Some were already whispering about packing up, not wanting to get caught in the middle of some neighborhood feud. I could see the tension spreading like a ripple across the group, and that only fueled my determination. I turned back to Karen, my jaw set. "You can call whoever you want," I said, my voice steady, "but the truth won't change. This lake is on my private land. I have the deed to prove it, and you're standing on my property right now." Her face twitched at that, a flicker of doubt flashing in her eyes, though she quickly masked it with another sneer. "Show me then," she snapped. "Because as far as I'm concerned, you're lying to get away with breaking the rules." Fine, I thought. If she wanted proof, I'd give her proof. I walked calmly to my truck, ignoring the way Karen's gaze followed me like a hawk from behind the seat. I pulled out the leather folder I always kept there. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Owning land next to an HOA, I had learned, meant you had to be ready for nonsense like this at any moment. I returned to the group and unfolded the papers. The bold, black letters on the deed spelled it out clearly. My name, my signature, my land. I held it up in front of her, letting her read it if she dared. "Here it is," I said. "Legal ownership. This lake is mine, not the HOA's, not yours." For the first time that morning, Karen felt it. Her eyes darted across the page, her lips moving silently as if she were trying to find a loophole. Her face reddened, and she shook her head. This can't be right," she muttered. "It must be some mistake." But it wasn't, and everyone knew it. My friends relaxed instantly, laughter bubbling up again as the tension broke. Rick raised his paddle from the kayak and shouted, "Told you, Karen, you're on the wrong side this time." A ripple of chuckles spread through the group, though I stayed quiet, watching Karen carefully. She wasn't the type to admit defeat. Easily she straightened, her jaw tightening, and pulled out her phone. "We'll see about this," she hissed. "I'm calling the board. We'll settle this right now." And with that, she stormed a few steps away, already dialing numbers with her manicured finger. I stood there, deed still in hand, my friends looking at me with relief and admiration. For me, though, this wasn't just about shutting Karen down. It was about defending what was rightfully mine. I had worked too hard for this land, too hard for the peace it brought me, to let anyone, especially someone like her, try to take it away. As the wind rippled across the lake and the kayaks drifted lazily in the sun, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Karen stood a few yards away with her phone pressed tight to her ear, pacing back and forth like a general preparing for battle. Her free hand gestured wildly, slicing the air as though her invisible audience could see her. Every so often, her voice rose high enough for all of us to hear. "He's got people all over the shoreline. Yes, they're using kayaks our lake. No, he claims it's his property. Well, you'd better get down here and see for yourself." My friends sat in a half circle of folding chairs, watching the show with the kind of uneasy amusement we feel when something isn't your problem but you're caught in the blast zone anyway. A few chuckled nervously. Others kept glancing at me as if to ask silently, "Are we really safe here?" I gave them a small nod, lifting the deed once more for emphasis. "Don't worry," I told them. "She can call the entire HOA board if she wants. It won't change what's written on this paper." Rick, still floating lazily on the water, cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, "Want me to paddle over and read the deed to her?" That broke the tension for a moment. Laughter rippled across the group, though it quickly faded as Karen spun on her heel and glared at us like we were unruly schoolchildren mocking a teacher. 15 minutes later, two figures appeared at the edge of the subdivision path. Both wore the unofficial HOA uniform, tucked in polos, khaki shorts, and expressions that were halfway between annoyance and self-importance. One carried a clipboard, the other a water bottle. They walked stiffly toward us, their eyes darting between the shoreline, the kayaks gliding on the lake, and the group of guests scattered across the grass. Karen rushed to them as though reinforcements had finally arrived. She pointed at me, her words tumbling out like bullets. "There he is. That's the one. He's letting outsiders use the lake, blasting music, taking over our property." I told him it wasn't allowed, but he refused to leave. "You need to handle this right now." The taller of the two men, a balding fellow with sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, looked at me with cautious curiosity. "Afternoon," he said stiffly. "We've had some complaints about non-residents using the lake. Is that what's happening here?" Before I could answer, Karen jumped in again, her voice climbing. "It's not just complaints, it's a blatant violation of HOA rules. He's mocking us, bringing in as many people as he wants. If you let him get away with this, what's next? Boats with motors, parties every weekend. It'll ruin the whole neighborhood." I let her finish her tirade, then stepped forward calmly, holding the folder with the deed still inside. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, "with all due respect, you're mistaken if you think this is your lake. This body of water and the shoreline you're standing on right now are entirely on my property. I bought this land before your subdivision was even built. I've got the paperwork to prove it. The second board member, younger and visibly less sure of himself, shifted awkwardly. Well, he began. Karen tells us this area is part of the HOA's common grounds. Karen tells you a lot of things. I cut in, not raising my voice but making sure my words were clear. I opened the deed and held it toward them. Why don't you take a look at what the county records say instead? The taller man hesitated, but eventually took the papers, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the lines. His lips moved silently as he read through the property boundaries, the recorded plat, and finally my name in bold print. His face grew more serious the longer he looked. Finally, he handed the papers to the younger man. Well, he said slowly, it does appear this parcel covers the lake. Karen gasped. That can't be right. You must be reading it wrong. Everyone knows the HOA maintains the shoreline. Maintaining something doesn't make it yours. I replied. If I mow your lawn, does that give me the right to tell you who can stand on it? No, same here. I've allowed the HOA access over the years because I'm not unreasonable. But don't twist that generosity into ownership. The younger man looked increasingly uncomfortable. Karen, he said carefully, the deed's pretty clear. This lake is on his land. If he wants guests here, that's his decision. Karen spun on him like he had just betrayed her deepest trust. Are you serious? You're siding with him? After everything this HOA has done to keep this place beautiful, he's making a mockery of us. Rick, unable to resist, shouted from the water, looks pretty beautiful to me, Karen. His son splashed his paddle in the lake for emphasis, and several of my other friends chuckled, though they tried to hide it. Karen's face flushed crimson. She turned back to me, her finger stabbing the air. This isn't over. If you think you can just do whatever you want, you're wrong. We'll take this to the county. We'll fight this legally. I folded the papers neatly and tucked them back into my folder. Go right ahead, I said. I've already been through the county. That's where this deed comes from. You'll only embarrass yourself if you try. For a moment, the only sounds were the soft splash of the kayaks and the gentle rustle of the breeze. Karen stood there trembling not from fear, but from fury. She opened her mouth as though to argue further, but no words came out. Finally, with a sharp spin of her heels, she stormed back toward the subdivision path, muttering under her breath. The two board members lingered, both looking uneasy. The older one cleared his throat. Well, I suppose that settles it. You're within your rights. Clearly, we'll make sure the HOA records reflect that the lake isn't common property. I nodded. That would save us all trouble down the road. The younger one gave a weak smile. Enjoy your day, sir. Then they followed in Karen's wake, though at a much slower pace, as if reluctant to face the storm of her wrath waiting at the cold-day-sack. As soon as they were out of sight, my friends erupted into applause. Some whistled, others slapped me on the back, and Rick raised his paddle like a victorious banner. Man, you shut her down cold, he said, paddling back toward shore. I laughed, though there was no triumph in my voice, just relief. I didn't want to fight, I admitted, but I wasn't about to let her ruin our day. We settled back into our gathering, the tension slowly melting away. Food was unpacked, drinks passed around, and the laughter returned, louder than before. Yet even as I smiled with my friends, a quiet thought lingered in the back of my mind. Karen wouldn't let this go. She was the type who saw losing not as a lesson but as a challenge. If today had rattled her, tomorrow she'd come back twice as determined. But for now I pushed the thought aside. The sun shimmered across the lake, the sound of kids laughing echoed over the water, and for that afternoon at least, peace was mine. The following week, life seemed to slip back into its rhythm, though not without an edge of unease. The laughter of my friends by the lake still echoed pleasantly in my memory, but it was followed quickly by the image of Karen's face, tight and trembling with frustration. That expression had told me one thing very clearly. She wasn't finished at first. I tried to brush it off. The land was mine, the deed was ironclad, and the board had even admitted as much. For most people, that would have been the end of it. But Karen wasn't most people. She was the type who thrived on control. It wasn't about rules or fairness, it was about power. I could see it in the way she barked orders at neighbors, how she strutted around with her clipboard like it was a badge of authority, losing in front of me, in front of her board, and worst of all in front of my friends that must have cut her deeply. By Monday morning, the emails began. The first was a formal letter from the HOA, delivered to my mailbox with all the pomp of official stationery. It didn't accuse me directly, but it was filled with carefully worded phrases like unauthorized gatherings, disturbances to the neighborhood, and misuse of community resources. They wanted a clarification of my activities on the lake. I smirked as I read it, recognizing Karen's fingerprints all over the wording. I responded with a short letter of my own, attaching a copy of my deed and politely stating that the lake was not, and had never been, HOA property. I thought that would put an end to it. But 2 days later, another letter arrived, this one less polite. It accused me of creating an unsafe environment for residents by allowing non-community members access to shared natural resources. They weren't even pretending anymore. It was Karen's voice, channeled through official letterhead. I wasn't angry so much as I was disappointed. The board members had seen the proof themselves. Yet here they were allowing Karen to weaponize their authority against me. Or maybe she had worn them down with her constant badgering, her endless phone calls and complaints until they gave her what she wanted just to get some peace. That was her strategy, persistence. If she couldn't win outright, she'd keep chipping away, letter by letter, meeting by meeting, until her enemy got tired and gave up. But she didn't know me very well. I didn't give up. On Thursday evening, just as I was finishing up some yard work, I noticed a group gathering at the edge of the subdivision. A cluster of neighbors stood with arms crossed, murmuring as Karen addressed them like a politician at a rally. She pointed dramatically toward the lake, her voice carrying across the distance. Though I couldn't hear every word, certain phrases drifted over the air. Dangerous outsiders, not following the rules. A few neighbors glanced in my direction, their expressions uncertain, maybe even wary. That stung more than the letters. I had lived beside these people for years, nodded hello at the mailbox, lent a ladder once or twice. Now, thanks to Karen's campaign, they were looking at me like I was some kind of intruder on my own land. The next day, 2 men showed up unannounced. One introduced himself as a lawyer representing the HOA in preliminary matters. His suit looked out of place against the backdrop of pine trees and gravel driveways, but his voice was confident, rehearsed. "We just want to clarify the situation with the lake," he said. "There's some confusion about property boundaries, and until it's sorted out, we'd advise you to cease hosting gatherings there." I folded my arms. "There's no confusion," I said. "I have the deed, the board saw it. This isn't your jurisdiction." He gave me a thin smile, the kind lawyers give when they know you're right but refuse to admit it. "We'll see what the county has to say," he replied. "In the meantime, it might be wise to avoid escalation." "Escalation," I repeated. "You mean Karen stirring everyone up with lies?" The lawyer didn't answer. He simply handed me his card and left with his associate. That night, I sat on my porch long after dark, listening to the gentle lap of the lake against the shore. It should have been peaceful, but my mind churned. It wasn't the threat of legal trouble that bothered me. My paperwork was solid. It was the constant harassment, the steady drumbeat of pressure designed to wear me down. Karen didn't care about the truth. She cared about winning, about making me bend to her will. And if she couldn't do it with rules, she'd do it with whispers, with neighbors turning cold, with lawyers showing up at my door. I wasn't about to let her drive me away from my own sanctuary, but I realized I'd have to play this smart. The next morning I visited the county records office. It took the better part of an afternoon, but I walked out with certified copies of my deed, maps, and boundary surveys. The clerk, an older gentleman, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, glanced at the stack of papers and said, "Looks like you've had some trouble with the HOA. You're not the first." That made me chuckle. "I believe it," I said. Armed with official documents, I felt a renewed confidence. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't stop. That suspicion was confirmed the following weekend when I caught sight of her again at the lake's edge, this time with 2 other board members in tow. She wasn't yelling this time, but her body language told me everything, pointing at the waterline, tracing imaginary borders with her finger, waving her clipboard like a wand that could rewrite reality. I walked over calmly, papers tucked under my arm. "If you've got questions," I said, "you can read these." I handed copies of the deed and survey to the board members, ignoring Karen's glare. One of them, the younger man from before, sighed as he skimmed the documents. "We've already seen this, Karen," he said gently. "There's no dispute. Here, the lake is on his land. We can't do anything." Karen's face tightened, but she didn't explode the way I expected. Instead, she gave a thin smile, the kind that sent a shiver down my spine. "Fine," she said sweetly, too sweetly. "If that's how it is, then I suppose we'll just have to find other ways to keep the neighborhood safe." And with that, she turned and walked away, clipboard snapping shut like the lid of a coffin. I stood there for a long moment, staring. After her, it wasn't victory. I felt it was warning, because Karen didn't sound defeated. She sounded like someone who had just thought of her next move. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside, felt amplified. My mind kept replaying her smile, the way her voice dripped with false sweetness. Karen wasn't going to fight me head-on anymore. She was going to come at me sideways, in ways I couldn't predict. And I had to be ready. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, beautiful as ever, but it no longer felt untouched. Karen's shadow lingered there, stretching across the water, promising more trouble to come. The first sign that Karen's fight had entered a new phase came one bright Tuesday morning when I heard a sharp knock at my front door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the casual tap of a delivery driver. It was insistent, deliberate, 3 loud thuds that demanded attention. I set down my coffee, already feeling the knot of suspicion tightening in my stomach, and opened the door. A man in a county inspector's uniform stood on the porch, clipboard in hand. His hat was pulled low against the sun, and his expression was politely neutral, the way bureaucrats learn to look when they're walking into someone else's business. "Morning, sir," he said. "We've received a report of unpermitted construction near the lake. Mind if I take a look?" My brows knitted. Construction. There's no construction here, just my dock, which has been there for years. He nodded as though he'd heard that 100 times before. Still, I'm required to inspect. I stepped aside reluctantly, leading him around the house and down to the shoreline. The lake sparkled as always, quiet and serene. The dock, stretching out like an old friend. There were no piles of lumber, no machinery, nothing even remotely resembling construction. The inspector jotted a few notes, walked the length of the dock, and snapped a couple of photos. "Looks fine to me," he said at last. "Probably just a misunderstanding. I didn't have to guess who filed that complaint. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. She couldn't fight me with the deed, so she tried to bury me in red tape. 2 days later it happened again, this time. A noise complaint. Another knock. Another official, this one from the county sheriff's office. Got a report of loud parties disturbing the neighborhood," the deputy said, his voice apologetic. "Mind if I check it out?" I gestured to the lake. Calm and quiet, only the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees. "You tell me, deputy, does this look like a party?" He cracked a smile, clearly seeing through the nonsense. "Doesn't look like one to me. Sorry to bother you, sir." As he drove away, my jaw clenched. Karen wasn't letting up. She was building a paper trail, a stack of complaints she could wave in front of the board or the county and say, "See, he's a problem." The harassment bled into everyday life. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact. A couple I'd known for years crossed the street rather than walk past my driveway. At the grocery store, I caught whispers my name, followed by words like selfish and troublemaker. Karen had been busy spreading her version of the story, that I was some outsider who thought the rules didn't apply, that I was trying to hog the lake for myself while dragging the neighborhood down. It gnawed at me more than I cared to admit. I wasn't some villain. I wasn't reckless. All I wanted was to enjoy my land, the land I had worked so hard for. Yet Karen's poison was seeping into the cracks of the community, turning people against me. One evening, Rick stopped by with a 12-pack of beer. He dropped onto my porch chair with a sigh and handed me a can. "Heard the latest?" he asked. Shook my head. "What now?" "She's been telling folks you're planning to sell the lake rights to some developer," he said. "Claims they'll build boat rentals, maybe even a lodge." I laughed, though it was hollow. "That's ridiculous. Why would I ever do that?" "Doesn't matter if it's true," Rick replied. "She just wants to make you the enemy. And some folks believe her." I sipped the beer, staring out at the water. "She's not just trying to win anymore. She's trying to ruin me." Rick clapped my shoulder. "Then don't let her. Stand your ground. She's counting on you to get tired and back off. But you've got the truth on your side." I nodded, though inside I knew the truth wasn't always enough. Perception mattered, influence mattered, and Karen had both in spades. The following week, another inspector showed up, this one from the environmental department. "Anonymous report," he said, flipping through his notes. "Possible contamination of the water from chemicals." I nearly laughed. Contamination from what? The lemonade we spilled last weekend. Still, he tested the water, filled his vials, and promised results in a few days. Predictably, the tests came back clean. But by then, the damage was done. Word had already spread through the neighborhood. There's something wrong with the lake. I could feel Karen's shadow everywhere, even when I sat on the dock at night. When the world was quiet and the stars shimmered on the water, my peace was fractured by the thought of her next move. She wasn't just fighting me, she was trying to choke the joy out of this place until I stopped using it altogether. One Saturday I decided to reclaim a little of what she'd taken. I invited a smaller group of friends over, just half a dozen. This time, we grilled burgers, paddled the kayaks, and tried to pretend things were normal. For a while, it worked. The laughter felt genuine, the food tasted good, and for a few hours, I believed Karen couldn't touch us. Then, just as the sun dipped low, 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway, lights flashing. The kids froze, mid-bite, adults straightened in their chairs, and my heart sank. The officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. "Sir," one of them said, "we've had multiple calls about trespassing on HOA property. Mind explaining what's going on here?" I pulled in a steady breath. "I've explained this a dozen times already. This is my property. The lake, the dock, the shoreline, all of it. I've got the deed inside. Would you like to see it?" The younger officer gave a sympathetic shrug. "If you don't mind, it'd help us close the report." I fetched the folder, flipping it open like I had so many times before. They examined it, nodded, and apologized for the inconvenience. "Looks like a neighbor's been misinformed," the older officer said tactfully. "Misinformed?" I muttered under my breath. That was a polite way of saying Karen was abusing the system. When the cruisers pulled away, the party had lost its spark. My friends tried to rally, but the mood had shifted. Parents gathered their kids, excuses were made, and soon the shoreline was quiet again. I stood alone by the dock, watching the ripples fade across the water, and felt the weight of Karen's victory. She hadn't taken my land, but she had managed to poison the joy of sharing it that night. As I locked the doors and turned off the lights, a thought crystallized in my mind. Karen wasn't just an annoyance anymore. She was a threat to my peace, to my reputation, to everything I had built here. And if I didn't find a way to stop her, she'd keep tightening the noose until the lake didn't feel like mine at all. I set the folder of documents on the kitchen table, staring at the bold print of my name on the deed. It was more than paper. It was proof of my right to be here. But against Karen's relentless campaign, I realized proof wasn't enough. I needed to fight back, not just defend, but counter. As I shut off the last light and headed to bed, one thought echoed louder than the crickets outside. It was time to turn the tables. The moment the HOA board members walked away, leaving Karen fuming and speechless, I thought the matter was settled. My friends cheered, laughing at the absurdity of the situation, and the day went on with music, food, and laughter. But deep down I knew someone like Karen wouldn't let it end so easily. People like her thrived on control, and the thought of being powerless must have burned her worse than the midday sun. Sure enough, the following week, the harassment began. It started small anonymous complaint letters left in my mailbox accusing me of disturbing community peace with my guests at the lake. Then it escalated. HOA violation notices appeared taped to my gate, each one demanding payment for fines I didn't owe. They claimed my friends had trespassed, my music was too loud, and even that my kayaks were illegal watercraft. Each notice had Karen's fingerprints all over it. I could have ignored it, but I chose a different path. I drove down to the county records office and pulled everything related to my land and the HOA boundary maps. I wanted solid proof, something that would crush her arguments completely. The clerk behind the desk, a kind older woman who had worked there for decades, raised her eyebrows as she scanned my documents. "Honey," she said, pointing to the large highlighted area, "this here is crystal clear. Your land predates that HOA by at least 15 years. Their boundary ends right where your fence line starts. That lake, that's yours and yours alone." I thanked her, made certified copies, and walked out with the kind of confidence Karen would never expect. It was one thing to have the deed in my folder. It was another to have an official county seal backing it up. Now, I wasn't just ready to defend myself, I was ready to end this once and for all. The next Saturday, my friends returned for another lakeside gathering, this time with even more enthusiasm. Word had spread about Karen's meltdown, and people wanted to see if she would dare show her face again. Sure enough, halfway through the afternoon, I spotted her marching down the slope, in her wide-brimmed sun hat, waving her phone like it was a weapon. Behind her trailed two new faces, fresh HOA recruits who clearly had no idea what they were walking into. "This is your final warning," Karen barked the moment she was within earshot. "Your guests are not allowed here, and if you don't clear them out immediately, we will pursue legal action. This is private HOA property, and you are in violation." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, watching as my friends glanced nervously at me. Then I calmly walked over, the sealed county documents tucked under my arm. I held them out, flipping to the page with the official boundary map. "Karen, you've been warned already," I said firmly. "This land is not HOA property. Here's the official county seal to prove it. The lake, the shoreline, everything within this boundary, it's mine. You have no jurisdiction here, none." One of the new HOA recruits leaned forward, squinting at the map. His expression shifted quickly from interest to embarrassment. He cleared his throat and muttered, Karen, he's right. This isn't under our HOA. The records are clear." The second man nodded, clearly uncomfortable as Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. But Karen wasn't the type to back down gracefully. "I don't care what some paper says," she snapped, her voice cracking. "This affects our community, and if he thinks he can just run wild out here, he's got another thing coming. I'll take this to court." I couldn't help but smile, though I kept my tone even. "Go ahead, take it to court, you'll lose. And when you do, I'll be filing harassment charges for every baseless notice, every fake fine, and every time you've tried to intimidate me or my guests. You want to play legal games, Karen? Be my guest." That shut her up. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but no words came out. The new recruits looked at each other, clearly realizing they had been dragged into a battle they couldn't win. Without another word, they walked away, leaving Karen standing alone, humiliated on the edge of the lake she so desperately wanted to control. My friends erupted into applause. Some even whistled, and the mood instantly lifted. We set up a bonfire. As the evening rolled in, roasting marshmallows and watching the sun sink low over the water, the sound of laughter carried across the waves, a perfect reminder of what this place was meant for peace, joy, and friendship, not petty power struggles. Night fell. I sat quietly on the dock, watching the stars reflect off the calm surface of the lake. The battle with Karen had been draining, but it taught me something valuable. When you know the truth and you stand firm, no amount of noise, intimidation, or false authority can shake you. She had tried to use fear and bluster to take away what that was mine, but in the end, she was powerless against the simple fact that the lake was mine and mine alone. Over the next few weeks, the harassment stopped. No more letters, no more bogus fines. Karen avoided me whenever our paths crossed, her head held a little lower than before. The HOA board, embarrassed by the spectacle, quietly distanced themselves from her antics. It was as if the neighborhood collectively decided it was better to let me enjoy my land in peace than to risk another public defeat. And so, life returned to normal. The lake became what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary. My friends and I gathered often, fishing, kayaking, and telling stories under the stars. Sometimes, when the evening was quiet and the water perfectly still, I thought about how close I'd come to letting someone else dictate my happiness, but then I'd smile, because I knew I had stood my ground. The story ended not with fireworks or a grand final showdown, but with something far better: peace, and that, more than anything, was worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment on the video. For more powerful real-life stories, subscribe to my YouTube channel Bright Reality and never miss an episode.